She made his mother's favorite dish. 20 minutes later, the Mafia boss was in the kitchen asking how. Before we begin, my loves, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. It helps our family grow, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this channel, and thank you for always coming back for more stories. Now, let me take you into a world where one simple dish changed everything. Julia Caruso was just a maid. Quiet. Invisible. Moving through the Carlo mansion like a shadow. The house itself was a world of rules. Cold marble floors, tall windows, guards at every corner, and staff who walked fast and talked low. No one looked at Julia twice. She kept her head down, did her work, and tried not to draw attention. But that morning, something pulled her toward the kitchen before sunrise. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe fate had finally decided to speak. She stepped inside, expecting silence. But her eyes landed on fresh tomatoes, a piece of lamb, and herbs sitting on the counter like someone left them just for her. Something in her heart twisted. A memory. A smell. A voice from her childhood telling her, "Julia, food is how we keep our family alive." Without thinking, she reached for the pan. She chopped, stirred, seasoned. Her hands moved the way her father once taught her. She made the dish that tasted like home. She didn't know this recipe was forbidden. She didn't know this recipe belonged to someone else. Someone dangerous, but the mansion knew. The smell rose through the halls. It slid under doors. It reached places she had never been allowed to enter. And it hit one man harder than a bullet, Adriano Carlo. The Mafia boss. The man everyone feared. The man who never lost control. Until now. 20 minutes later, the kitchen door swung open. Julia froze. Adriano stood there. Eyes dark, jaw tense, breathing like the world had stopped. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten her. He didn't blink. He just stepped closer, his voice low, sharp, cold. "How?" he said. "How do you know this dish?" And that was the moment everything changed. Adriano stared at her like the world had tilted out of place, his voice dropping even lower as he repeated the question. "How do you know this dish?" And the kitchen fell silent, every staff member pretending not to watch while their eyes never left them. And Julia's voice shook as she whispered that her father taught her, that it was just something from home. But the moment she said her father's name, Caruso, Adriano froze, his expression shifting from anger to something colder, deeper, something that looked almost afraid, because he knew that name. He knew it too well. And in that instant the truth slammed into him like a weight he wasn't ready to carry. The ghost contract his mother created years ago. The promise she made to protect the Caruso family forever. The signature of a man who once saved their lives. A contract that had never expired. And Adriano realized Julia wasn't just a maid. She was the daughter of the man who paid the highest price for helping them. And she didn't even know it. And that truth hit him so hard he stepped back like he needed air, his chest rising fast, his eyes burning with memories he spent years trying to bury. Then without another word he turned and walked out of the kitchen. Fast, too fast for a man who usually moved with calm control, leaving everyone confused and whispering, wondering why the coldest mafia boss in the city looked shaken by a single girl and a single dish. While Julia stood there in the middle of the kitchen, heart pounding, having no idea that her life had just collided with a secret that tied her fate to his long before she was even born. Adriano didn't sleep that night. The image of Julia standing in his kitchen haunting him until he finally ordered his men to dig into her past. And when the files came back his hands tightened, because every detail confirmed what he already feared. Her father had once saved him and his mother from a betrayal inside the family. Her father paid the price for it, and the protection contract his mother signed was still active, binding him to guard Julia with his own life. And the worst part was that Julia had no idea about any of it. She was walking through his house with the innocence of someone who didn't know her name could shake a mafia empire. So Adriano changed the rules overnight. placing quiet guards around her, moving her to a safer room closer to his private wing, giving her tasks that placed her under his direct watch. And the staff whispered louder now, wondering why a simple maid was suddenly treated like someone important, while Julia felt more confused than anyone, noticing the extra eyes, the subtle protection, the way doors opened for her that never opened before, and when she began cleaning new areas she wasn't used to. She found little things that tugged at her memory. Old photographs tucked away, familiar names written on papers, recipes that matched her father's handwriting, and a childhood story her parents whispered to her about a woman who taught her father how to cook long before Julia was born. And though she didn't understand any of it yet, each small discovery felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place, pointing her toward a truth she was never meant to find. And the clues she kept finding slowly pulled her toward Adriano, because the next morning he called her back into the kitchen, his voice calm but firm as he asked her to remake the dish. And she agreed, even though her hands trembled, and he stood beside her this time, watching every movement, asking about the spices, the timing, the memory that guided her, and somehow cooking together softened the air around them, turning the kitchen into a quiet place where the noise of the mansion couldn't reach. And as the dish simmered, Adriano found himself speaking in a way he never planned, telling her pieces of his mother's story, how she cooked with so much heart, how she believed food connected people, but he held back the darkest parts, careful with every detail, sharing only the things he could handle saying out loud. And Julia listened gently, unknowingly becoming the only person allowed close to the part of him he kept locked away, the part filled with grief and guilt. And the more time he spent watching her work, hearing her memories, seeing how she moved through his world with honesty instead of fear, the more his loyalty to the ghost contract twisted into something sharper, heavier, turning into a need to protect her that even he couldn't explain. And soon his men noticed how often he checked on her, how his eyes followed her movements during meetings, how he stepped in first whenever she was nearby. And whispers spread through the Mafia network, suspicion climbing fast, some believing she was a threat, others thinking she was a spy, everyone noticing that the boss was changing in ways none of them understood, while Julia had no idea that every day she spent in that mansion was pulling her deeper into a world that was starting to revolve around her without her permission. Everything changed the day Julia was asked to clean Adriano's private office, a room no one entered without permission, a room filled with silence and power. And as she dusted the shelves, her eyes caught a drawer that wasn't fully closed, and something pulled her toward it, a feeling she couldn't explain. And when she gently opened it, she found papers stacked neatly, an old contract with names she recognized, a symbol her father once carved into wood when she was little, and then a photograph that made her entire body go still. Her father standing beside Adriano's mother, smiling like they were family, and right beside it lay a sealed envelope with her name written in handwriting she remembered from childhood. And she didn't open anything, didn't touch anything else, but her heart knew every piece in that drawer was about her past, about the things no one ever told her. And as she stood there trying to breathe, Adriano appeared at the doorway, his shadow falling over the room, his eyes widening the moment he saw what she had found. And the air tightened because he wasn't angry, not even close. He was scared, truly scared, because she was inches away from discovering everything he had been hiding. Who saved him when he was young? Why her presence shook him to his core? What happened to his mother the night everything changed? And the secret contract that tied their lives together long before she stepped into his mansion. And for the first time, Julia saw fear in the eyes of a man the entire city feared. Adriano stepped into the office and closed the drawer himself, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding hers. But his silence said everything. And by the end of that day, the entire mansion felt different because his men had noticed the shift, and whispers started spreading fast, questions growing like fire. Why was a maid being protected? Why was she allowed into restricted areas? Why did the boss look for her with his eyes before any meeting began? And every question pushed more pressure onto Adriano, making the air in the house heavier, colder, sharper, and Julia felt the change before anyone said a word. Staff who once greeted her now turned away. People moved aside when she walked by. Conversations stopped the moment she entered a room, and for the first time she felt unsafe in a place that was supposed to keep her hidden, and Adriano watched it all happen, trying to distance himself so no one would notice how much he cared. But every time he tried to step back, he found himself stepping right in front of her instead, shielding her without thinking, checking the cameras twice, giving orders that revealed more of his protective instinct than he wanted, and soon the entire network saw it too. Tension growing as some men began to question her presence, while others watched her a little too closely. And in that rising pressure, something darker began to move behind the scenes. Someone inside the Mafia realizing that Julia wasn't just a maid. She was the one soft spot in Adriano's armor, the one link that made him hesitate. And if they wanted to weaken him or break him, they only needed to reach her first. And the danger grew silently around her, while she still didn't understand why the world was suddenly closing in. Adriano couldn't watch the fear in her eyes any longer. So one night he called her into the quietest room in the mansion, a place where no guards listened, no shadows moved, and with a voice that sounded nothing like the cold boss everyone feared, he finally told her everything, telling her about the contract his mother signed long ago, the promise to protect the Caruso family with her life, the night her father stepped in and saved them both, the sacrifice he made so Adriano could survive, and the promise his mother whispered to him before she died, a promise that tied their families together forever. And then he told her why the dish broke him the moment he smelled it, how it was his mother's last recipe, the one she cooked on the night everything fell apart, and the moment Julia made it. It felt like his mother had walked back into the room, and his voice softened as he admitted he didn't know how to handle that pain and comfort at the same time. And Julia stood there frozen, every word hitting her like waves she couldn't breathe through. And when she realized her entire life was quietly linked to his, that her father's kindness had shaped her destiny, that her presence in the mansion wasn't a mistake, but a promise born before she was even alive, the shock cracked into tears, not from fear, but from a strange relief, a warmth she had never felt, a sense of belonging she didn't know she was missing. And for the first time she understood why every step she took in that house felt familiar, why Adriano looked at her like she was more than a stranger, more than a maid, because in a way she had always been tied to him, written into his past, his protection, his promise, long before she ever knew his name. When Adriano finished speaking, the room fell quiet, and the silence held a truth neither of them wanted to face, because the protection contract that tied their families together had an ending date, and that date arrived at midnight, meaning Julia was no longer bound to stay in the Carlo mansion, no longer tied to his world, no longer required to live under his protection. And the thought of losing her settled heavily on Adriano's shoulders as he stepped back, giving her space, preparing himself to let her walk away out of respect, out of honor, because he knew he had no right to keep her now. But when he tried to speak the words goodbye, something inside him broke, and he realized he couldn't do it, not because of the contract, not because of the past, not because of duty, but because somewhere between the truth and the fear and the memories she stirred, he had grown to truly care for her. And the confession slipped out in a low voice, raw and honest, telling her he didn't want her to leave, that losing her felt like losing the last piece of his mother he still held on to, that her presence was the first warmth he had let close to him in years. And Julia's breath caught, because she had never expected those words from a man who lived behind walls thicker than the mansion itself. And in that moment, she saw not the Mafia boss, but the man underneath, bruised by life, but still holding on. And when he stepped back again, giving her the choice with trembling restraint. She understood that staying or leaving was now entirely in her hands, and with her heart pounding, she made her decision, choosing not out of duty or fear or the past, but out of the pull she felt every time he looked at her like she mattered, telling him she would stay, freely, willingly, because her story didn't feel complete anywhere else but beside him, and that choice became the heartbeat of their happy ending. And from the moment Julia chose to stay, the entire mansion shifted around her, the cold halls slowly warming as the staff who once stared with suspicion began to accept her, and Adriano's men, who had questioned her every step, now nodded with respect whenever she passed, because they had seen the truth for themselves, seen how the boss stood differently when she was near, seen how her presence softened the sharp edges of the house, turning a place built on power and fear into something calmer, something almost human, and day by day Julia found her own place inside the Carlo Empire, no longer moving like a maid who blended into the walls, but like someone who carried quiet importance, someone who unknowingly changed the direction of the entire family just by being herself. And Adriano never hid that truth, not from his men, not from his world, because he knew she wasn't there as a servant, but as the one person who brought light back into a life covered in shadows. And together they rebuilt pieces of his mother's legacy, returning to the kitchen on her anniversary each year, cooking the dish that brought them together. The smell filling the mansion the same way it did that first morning, but this time, without fear, without confusion, only peace, and every moment reminded them how a single recipe opened the door to everything that followed. And as seasons passed, the story of Julia Caruso and Adriano Carlo settled into the walls of the mansion like a whispered legend, a quiet truth that what began with one forbidden dish became a bond none of them expected, a connection woven through history, loyalty, sacrifice, and in time. Something gentle, something strong, something close to love, a full circle neither of them could have seen coming, but both of them chose to keep forever. Thank you so much, my loves, for staying with me till the end of this story. I hope you felt every moment, every emotion, every heartbeat between Julia and Adriano. You being here means everything to me. Truly. This channel exists because of you, and I'm grateful for every second you spend with our little family. Please, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment for me. It helps our family grow, it helps the stories reach more hearts, and it keeps me going. I appreciate every single one of you. Tell me, what part touched you the most? What emotion did you feel strongest? And do you want more stories like this? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your thoughts. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting We're a Family, and I can't wait to see you in the next story.